Hello, my name is Caroline Legrand, and I'm a member of Servire Chorus. I'm very excited to be sharing with you all today the topic of my master's thesis. Unlike many of my colleagues in Servire, my professional vocation is not music, although it's my favorite hobby, it's theology. I'm a third-year student at McAfee School of Theology with Mercer University receiving my Master of Divinity, and I will actually be graduating in less than a month. Woohoo! So I'm sharing with you my master's thesis, which I just recently submitted and was approved for publication. So this presentation is technically my thesis's debut into the public. So I'm really excited to share it with you all and see what you think. So let's get into it. The thesis topic is actually a question, and it's how can music assist in the subversive intent of the Eucharist? Now, I know this might be a little intimidating right now, and have no fear. It's actually intimidating to lots of seminary students that I've presented it to who just look at me like deer in headlights. But that's okay. It's a lot of complex ideas that we're going to flesh out. So I'll say it again. How can music assist in the subversive intent of the Eucharist? Before we get into the thesis, you may be wondering, why am I interested in this topic? Well, it's where my loyalties converge. My first and greatest love in life is music, singing to be specific. I've been singing almost literally my whole life, and it's not just something I do, it's who I am. It's who I understand myself to be at my core. I began my vocational journey as a musician. I went to Furman along with several of my Servire colleagues and received a Bachelor of Arts in Music. And this is a picture of the Furman Singers, our big choir, in rehearsal. And I'm actually not in this picture because I was studying abroad at the time, but I chose it because it perfectly exemplifies what music means to me. It's about creating community. It's about joining people together to experience something that's greater than ourselves. But then I ventured into the world of theology, and what a ride it's been. I began to explore and discover the meaning of what Christians call the Eucharist, or the Lord's Supper. It means so many different things to different peoples and communities, but I've come to my own conclusion. I believe that the event of the Eucharist is a transformative act that is intended to create community rather than merely represent it. Now, that might sound familiar to something I said earlier about music. So I keep coming back to music. I keep wondering what music's role is in the Eucharist and community, and what they have in common with each other. My explorations have led me to wonder, is music Eucharistic in its effect? We'll find that out. So under the arch of my thesis is 3 sub-questions to break it down. The first one is, how is the Eucharist, according to 1 Corinthians 11, 17 through 34, intended to be a subversive ritual for communal change? 2, how can music allow the subaltern to subvert the hegemonic? And we'll break down these terms later. And 3, bringing it all together, how can music in contemporary worship assist in the subversive intent of the Eucharist? In the first sub-question, I turn to the biblical scriptures, to 1 Corinthians 11, 17 through 34, where the Apostle Paul is writing to the Corinthian church because he has heard that there are divisions at their Lord's Supper, and he is very angry with them. He's angry in particular with the rich members because they would arrive to the meal early because they had less laborious jobs than the poor members. And fun fact, the Lord's Supper was originally practiced as a full meal, not as little wafers or crackers with grape juice or wine. And the rich members would eat their food ahead of time, the food that they brought for the potluck to share for everyone. And they wouldn't wait for the less wealthy members to get there and leave them with very little food to eat. So Paul is furious with them because he says that this goes against everything that the Lord's Supper is supposed to be about, which is equality and mutual respect. Jesus died for all people, especially for the poor and oppressed, because he had a special love for them and was in fact one of them and died as one of them because he was one of them. And so the Lord's Supper should express Jesus's vision of equality. So I am arguing that Paul says the Eucharist should not maintain the status quo of social stratification, but it should subvert it, turning a hierarchical system into an egalitarian one. And I have a definition here of subversive if you don't know what it means. It means seeking or intended to disrupt an established system or institution. So Paul says that the Eucharist should subvert the status quo, turning a hierarchical system into an egalitarian one, bringing together diverse peoples in a new power arrangement where all have equal access to power, thereby liberating the oppressed. In this next sub-question, I turn to music. Hegemony, to help you with this question, is a term coined in the 1920s by an Italian theorist named Antonio Gramsci, and it is a form of ideological and cultural dominance as opposed to political or military dominance, thereby rendering it pervasive and subtle and mostly invisible and undetected. The term subaltern was also coined by Gramsci to understand his idea of hegemony, and it is a class of people subordinated under the hegemony of the dominant class. So music can perform two necessary functions in communities. One, music can strengthen communal bonds because it is universal, embodied, and points to something beyond ourselves, something intangible. In group singing in particular, individuals learn to sync their breathing and movement with the others around them by practice and attentiveness to the presence and movements of their neighbors. Through this, group singing does not merely symbolize unity, it actually enacts it. But music can also subvert the status quo of a community structure and push it towards transformation. This can be done through musical hybridity. Musical hybridity is born out of the tension of clashing cultures and styles. When these styles are mixed together, they form a third new sound that defies classification and characterization. This is important because it disrupts the homogeneous music of the hegemonic culture and allows other voices to be heard. And so this was my favorite part. This next part was my favorite part of my whole thesis, where I explore hip-hop culture and how it is a prime example of music allowing the subaltern to subvert the hegemonic. Similar to the way hybridity is born out of the tension of clashing cultures, hip-hop was born out of the racial and socioeconomic tension of the United States in the 1970s, with Black and Brown youth longing to discover and declare their own unique identity in a hegemonic society that sought to assimilate them into white culture. As one researcher states, one of hip-hop's key characteristics is its ability to take an existing idea, practice, or way of doing something and to make it into something new. In hip-hop's early stages, rappers heavily sampled music from various existing genres like soul, funk, disco, rock, and reggae. So what was initially a small underground movement in the Bronx worked its way into the mainstream society and is today a billion-dollar global industry and dominates the popular entertainment industry. This is an example of music allowing the subaltern to subvert hegemonic culture. And in my last thesis sub-question, I bring all of my research together, music and Eucharist, to ask how music in contemporary worship can assist in the subversive intent of the Eucharist. And why is this important? Because, as Paul said, the Eucharist is not supposed to maintain the status quo, but to shatter it and push communities towards change, towards a more egalitarian structure. And music can help achieve this through hybridity, which allows the subaltern to subvert the hegemonic culture, allowing their voices to break the mold of homogeneity and be heard and respected. And so in this chapter, I offer practical ideas of ways that congregations and churches can incorporate musical hybridity at the moment of the Eucharist. I say that they can do this through hybridity of musical genre, style, form, time, themes, and theology. And they can also do this through shared and diverse leadership of worship, which gets to the heart of the reason for music hybridity in the first place, which is the people that create the music. And no better way to do that than to put people in leadership positions. And so ways that churches can do this is through a collaborative, diverse team-led worship or a worship rotation of leaders. And I have a picture up here of the book that was the foundation for this sub-question. It was really helpful to me. It's The Next Worship, Glorifying God in a Diverse World by Sandra Maria van Opstal, where she discusses ways churches can incorporate multicultural music into their worship. The final image I will leave you with is that of the great heavenly banquet, egalitarian community. God's vision and plan for our world is an egalitarian community where all peoples are valued equally in their diversity, not despite their diversity, where all voices are an essential part of the community. The Eucharist is meant to be a reflection, an embodiment of that grand heavenly banquet. It is a foretaste of that ultimate kingdom reality. And music making is a God-given vessel to bridge the gap between the divine and humanity. Musical hybridity, where a multiplicity of voices intertwine to make one voice, is a living embodiment of that egalitarian community that God envisions for our world. And so I will leave you with the words of the book of Revelation, which imagine what heaven will look like. After this, I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, robed in white with palm branches in their hands. They cried out in a loud voice, saying, "Salvation belongs to our God who is seated on the throne and to the Lamb." And all the angels stood around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, singing, "Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen." Thank you all for listening to my presentation, and I hope I have given you some new insight on music and the Eucharist and how they work together to create egalitarian community. Thank you all.